So when you are in overreaching, you train harder, heart rate variability goes up. Do we know why is it going up? Is it kind of dysregulation of autonomic nervous system, or do we know what is it?
Yeah, my interpretation is that means that our body's trying to defend itself from the excess of stress. It's like a response to save energy. Okay, it's counterintuitive, but it makes sense from a biological and evolutionary point of view.
Mm. And how do you see, you said that it's good, for example, to have subjective experiences. Sometimes when you see a study that, for example, heart rate variability links closely to subjective experiences, wouldn't that kind of mean that then you don't need the other if they are kind of the same? Or do you see that athletes and coaches kind of need confirmation that you see the heart rate variability is going down, the subjective feelings are showing the same, so it's probably like this? Or how would you see it?
I see that depending on the sport, we should combine, for example, heart rate variability if the sport is more predominantly an aerobic sport because the autonomic nervous system has a very strong link with the aerobic adaptation, okay? Because there is some changes in our brain, which is evident with the change in the heart rate regulation and with subjective measures, mostly from scales, okay? But as I said, sometimes we only need an honest conversation with the athlete. For me, the best monitoring tool is a good conversation before the warm up, because if there is a honest and if you have a good relationship with the as coach with the athlete, he or she will say you the truth all time. So it's more easy to understand what is going on. And for example, in other times, when you use different monitoring tools regarding the subjective tools, I remember one athlete that every morning, all the time, she was not very motivated, but it was all the days. So asking for motivation that date at that moment was no sense. The person was not motivated because he was maybe still sleeping, okay, in the early hours of the day. So we should also look for the best subjective measure depending on the person characteristic, the athlete characteristics, and also the moment of not only the moment of the day, but also the moment of the season. For example, in team sport, when most players are competing for playing, it's not very intelligent to ask for some information to the group. Maybe individually, with this information and other objective information coming from objective monitoring tools, take the decision.
Yeah, I remember I saw a presentation. I think it was a Dutch speed skating team, and they measured everything. They had a big budget and they were measuring everything. And then they said that still the best way to gauge the kind of readiness of the athlete was to talk them in the breakfast table and look them in the eyes. And if they looked like super tired, then it was not the best day for training. And
An education, because from the Italian coaching perspective, and I agree a lot with this perspective, we should educate athletes in the sense that they should be aware and have the knowledge, the technical knowledge to understand what we are doing and for what we are doing that. So this is a good approach because in this way, the athlete can be more engaged with our approach and our view. And if they know the whys and the whats and all the reasons behind the techniques and the decision, etc., it's better to them to understand what we are pursuing and be more confident and honest with the communication.
Yeah, makes sense. And when you are doing heart rate variability, are you usually looking the metrics from the sleep, or do you do orthostatic test, or what data do you look? How do you segment it to a certain part that it's the most valid?
Excellent point. It's a very hard question because it depends on the sport, the athlete, and what you are looking for. Okay. For example, early in the morning, most probably we are thinking about the recovery after the day before, the training session, the previous training session. Looking before the training session, for example, during the afternoon, maybe we are looking at a mix of readiness mixed with recovery from the previous day. Looking at the night, maybe we are looking for the effect of the training session of that day. Okay. And apart from this, there are other physiological or ambient influences that can bias or make some difficulty to understand what is going on. So at this point, we should come back to the fine tuning approach. So if you know the limitations and the specific validity of every monitoring approach with high variability, we can use maybe at morning or before the training or at night, but mixing this information with other information to better understand what is going on.
But would you agree that kind of middle of the night is probably the most controlled situation? We are sleeping, we are in a dark room, and so on. So
Yeah,
everything else, like, morning, many things affected. During the day, many
yeah,
things,
but
yeah.
yeah, but for example, I can talk about an example of very first studies we run in the past with elite soccer players, and we measure the nighttime variability. Okay, and we started with all the team, and because of a lots of transfer, the sample was reduced, and another loss of sample came because some of the players make some light prolonged exercise during noon and 1 2 a.m. Maybe you can realize what kind of exercise. So this activity most probably affected her variability. So this was the reason we did not include these pledges in the final analysis. So as I said, okay, evidence suggests that maybe the more control setting is during the nighttime, but this nighttime measure has only some limitations. Okay. And as I said, it depends what you are looking for. It's not the same looking for recovery than looking for readiness or looking for the behavior of high variability over the whole week,
Yeah.
which is a very interesting measure.
Yeah, and how would you see heart rate variability in non-aerobic sports? Let's say it could be have a quite strong power component. Maybe it has aerobic component also. Do you see the HRV useful, or is it only for the kind of aerobic part of the body, or how would you think of it?
Okay, very nice question. Variability is mostly linked to aerobic adaptation. Okay, but aerobic adaptations make anaerobic athletes to recover better between sessions, for example. So, using high variability along with other measures may be helpful in anaerobic or strength sports to monitor recovery, for example. And I think this is very useful in some context because we need, although some sports are poor anaerobic, okay, we need some a minimum of aerobic adaptation to favor recovery and to favor a very good quality of training in the very next sessions.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if this is my idea or I stole it from someone, but what's your thought? I've been thinking like neuromuscular readiness for training. If you would do always like counter movement jump, maybe 3 after warm up, would you think that would help like deciding when it's the time for power training, for example, for power athletes?
Yes, it's a very simple evaluation, performing 2 3 control movement jumps before training. This is not new. This is a very old idea. For example, in track and field, I remember that some elite athletes in the 80s in Spain jumped in the wall,
Mm.
and if they reach some tooth in the wall, they knew they were in a good shape or ready to perform in the session. But nowadays, for example, with the force platforms, we can look not only for the jumping height, but also for the kinetics of the jump. So this could be a very useful measure to look for neuromuscular adaptations through the week.
Yeah, although usually you don't have a force plate in every place where you're training, depends a bit.
No, and most of the kinetic parameters, in my opinion, nowadays, there are a strong effort in saying that some kinetic parameters are very useful, etc. But I work sometimes with first-time cubes during jumping, and I think that, okay, maybe there is some relevant or valuable information in the first-time cube, but it's not so important as other measures or combine this information with other measures apart from the jumping height.
Yeah, and if we move then to the next topic, basically the post-activation potentiation, or the more newer name that you have given. Could you tell more about this?
Okay, post-activation performance enhancement. My first contact with this was as an athlete, a bad athlete, but low caliber athlete, but I was a sprinter. And in practice, we perform these complex training schemes of making, for example, some squats and then sprinting or jumping. And this is more classically, first squats and then making skipping or sprinting. But we were not aware that in most cases, and this was called as transfer, okay, in the past, not as potentiation, it was like a transference between exercises, not only activation. And during my PhD, because we identified very early in some first experiments, some years before my PhD, that endurance runners jump higher after exhaustion, we decided to focus on this, and we discovered that this was an adaptation or a response which is specific for endurance, the endurance phenotype. Okay, it claims that well-adapted endurance athlete, or in this case runner, can perform better after a prolonged exercise with or without exhaustion from a neuromuscular point of view, which is, for example, producing more mechanical power, okay? And a non-adapted athlete to aerobic endurance activities don't show this kind of responses after prolonged with exhaustion or not exhaustion exercises. So this was first my practice experience as a sprinter, then studying, researching with endurance runners, and subsequently in different studies, we look for different stimuli to induce some enhancement of, for example, sprinting and jumping capacities. More recently, for example, with the throwing ability of handball players, for example, we performed the past year an experiment with handball players after making some isometrics or plyometrics in the warm-up. So we have different approaches, and basically, with a very recent systematic review of some Chinese colleagues, I'm very happy of participating of this very nice work. They found that most studies with post-activation performance enhancement basically outperforming or warm up with a cooling down, because the control condition makes the athlete to cool down. Okay, so basically you are comparing a very different setting or activity, or a non-comprehensive warm-up protocol, which is like a very incomplete or short or insufficient warm-up with a non-warm-up. So this is the reason that probably most of the studies are comparing not an activation protocol, but a simpler warm-up with a non-warm-up. So because of this systematic review, we are proposing some methodological approaches and decisions to try to control better these factors during the design and the application in the field.
Yeah, and if I try to clarify, so basically there's different one for endurance phenotypes. They can perform better.
Yeah.
They can produce more power even after exhaustion,
Yes.
right?
Let me to, for example, there is a paper, an old paper, not very old, but Moran and Peggy in Journal Strength and Conditioning Research performing submaximal contractions, okay? And after these submaximal contractions, they compare two groups. One group of endurance athletes and another group of power athletes. And after, I don't remember exactly, but maybe 10 minutes of submaximal contractions at maybe 50% of maximal voluntary contraction, they found that the endurance athletes increase the rate of torque development, which is like saying they increase the explosive force, okay? And the power athletes, because of performing some maximal continuous effort, they impair their rate of torque development. So the same stimuli was good for one group, the endurance adaptive group, but what was bad for the other, the power adaptive athletes. And the same could be said in some way with other type of exercises, more power-based exercise or high-intensity resistance exercises, in the sense that if we use, for example, plyometrics, most probably the sprinter or the strength trained athlete or a jumper will benefit more from these exercises in the warm-up, and an endurance athlete, not in all cases, can be benefit with these stimuli.
And so basically, for power athletes, if you do something, for example, power lifting, you probably
Yeah.
improve